Vacate the room. My father said. Not quietly. Not like a request. Like a command issued to a tenant who had overstayed his welcome. That same evening, my older brother Ryan walked through the front door with 2 suitcases and a wife who was 7 months pregnant. Amanda stood just behind him. One hand resting on her stomach, while her eyes moved slowly across my bedroom. The walls I had painted myself. The shelves I had drilled into the studs one Saturday afternoon. Every inch of that room paid for with money from my own paycheck. It would probably be easier, she said calmly, if you just moved out altogether. My father nodded. My mother looked at the floor. So I packed 3 cardboard boxes and walked out of a house that legally belonged to me. 3 days after I left that house, my phone rang at exactly 11. The name on the screen surprised me. Amanda. For a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. The last time we had spoken, she had suggested it might be better if I left my own home entirely. But something in the timing felt different. Like the calm before a structural failure, you can't see yet, but know is coming. I answered. She didn't bother with hello. Her voice was tight. Breath uneven. Like she'd just run up a flight of stairs. Nathan. Tell me it's not true. I sat up straighter. Tell you what isn't true. A long pause. Then she whispered. The bank says the loan on the house was never authorized by you. Before I go any further with this story, take a second to hit like and subscribe if you enjoy real life stories about family, money, and the moment someone finally decides they've had enough. It really helps the channel more than you might think. And if you're listening right now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and what time it is there. I always read them. Now let me explain how my own family ended up forging my name on my house. My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 31 years old. And I work as a licensed structural engineer in Fort Collins, Colorado. My job is to calculate load limits, inspect foundations, and make sure the buildings people trust with their lives don't collapse under pressure. Numbers have always made sense to me. Steel tolerances, stress calculations, material fatigue, those things follow rules. If a structure fails, there's always a reason. Families don't work that way. 4 years ago, when I was 27, I signed the papers on a house I believed would solve a problem for everyone. My parents had just sold the aging trailer they'd been living in outside town. And suddenly they had nowhere stable to go. So I bought a place big enough for all of us. That decision would cost me far more than the mortgage. I still remember the pen they handed me at the closing table. Cheap plastic, blue ink. The kind of pen you grab from a jar at a reception desk and never think about again. But that pen signed the most expensive commitment of my life. April 18th. 4 years ago. A small title office 2 blocks from Old Town in Fort Collins. The room smelled faintly like printer toner and carpet cleaner. The closer slid the paperwork toward me one stack at a time, pointing to the lines where my signature belonged. When the last page was stamped, she smiled and said, "Congratulations, Mr. The house is officially yours." The deed carried exactly one name. Nathan Andrew Cole. No co-senior. No co-owner. Just a 27-year-old engineer with a stable job. A credit score just over 750. And an FHA mortgage for $268,000. The monthly payment was $2,510. 30 years. Most people buying their first home think about freedom, privacy, maybe starting a family. That wasn't why I bought the house. I bought it because my parents needed somewhere to live. My father, Victor Cole, was 60 and living on a disability check, after a back injury ended his career as a contractor. My mother, Linda, worked part-time at a craft store, but the income barely covered groceries. For 11 years they had lived in a double-wide trailer outside the city limits. When the park sold the land to a developer, residents were given 90 days to leave. They didn't have a plan, so I made one. The house I bought sat on Maple Ridge Drive. A quiet street lined with cottonwood trees and aging mailboxes. It wasn't extravagant, but it was more space than I needed. 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, and a half-finished basement that still smelled like concrete dust. I only needed 1 bedroom, but I bought 3. Because the arrangement seemed simple. My parents would move in. They'd help with utilities. We'd share the house as a family. There was no lease. No written agreement. Just trust. They moved in a week later. My mother arrived first with a car full of boxes, ceramic birds, photo albums, old kitchen pans she refused to replace. My father showed up later in his pickup with his recliner strapped into the bed like it was the most important piece of furniture in the world. Within a day the living room looked like theirs. Within a week the house felt like it had always belonged to them. What never arrived was the help with bills. Electricity statements came addressed to me. Water bills came addressed to me. Internet. Property tax. Insurance. Every piece of mail carried my name. At first I didn't mind. I told myself they needed time to adjust. My father's back hurt some mornings. My mother's hours at work fluctuated. I had a steady salary, and the house was big enough for everyone. So I paid. Month after month the $2,510 mortgage left my account on the first. Every time I clicked submit payment, I told myself the same thing. This is what family does. We carry each other. And for 4 years I believed that if I just kept doing my part, kept paying, kept fixing things, I kept making sure the house ran smoothly, eventually my parents would see it. Eventually they would recognize what I had built for them. What I didn't understand then was that some people don't see the structure holding them up. They just assume it will always be there. To understand what happened next, you need to understand the internal architecture of the Cole family. Every family has a structure. Some are balanced. Ours wasn't. In our house there were 2 roles that had been assigned long before we were old enough to question them. Ryan Cole was the golden child. I was the foundation. Ryan is 3 years older than me. He has the kind of face that makes people comfortable immediately, easy smile, confident posture. The kind of guy who can walk into a room and start a conversation with anyone within 30 seconds. He sold used trucks at a dealership called Front Range Motors and talked about it like he was negotiating corporate mergers. My father adored him. Victor Cole had a philosophy he repeated often, especially after a couple of beers at family barbecues. Sons carry the legacy. Daughters, or in my case the younger kid, carry the work. He meant it as a joke. The problem with family jokes is that they usually reveal exactly what people believe. Ryan represented the future. I represented utility. When Ryan graduated from community college after 3 attempts and 1 semester where he nearly failed accounting, my father threw a celebration in the backyard. 17 people came. There was a grill running all afternoon, a cooler full of beer, and a homemade banner my mother hung from the fence that said, "Proud of you, Ryan." My father gave a toast about perseverance, about how proud he was of his son. 2 years later I graduated from Colorado State University with a degree in structural engineering. Dean's List 6 semesters out of 8. Top 10% of my class. The day I graduated my father sent me a text message. 4 words. Good job, kid. No barbecue. No banner. No speech. Just a text. When I passed the professional engineering exam a year later, something fewer than a quarter of engineering graduates ever achieve, my mother smiled politely and said, "That's nice. Nathan, your brother just got promoted to senior sales." Senior sales meant he was allowed to close deals on his own, at a truck lot, with customers who usually financed vehicles they couldn't afford. By the time Ryan was 30 he had accumulated nearly $40,000 credit card debt. I only learned about that much later. My father claimed he didn't know. But there were signs. Victor would occasionally ask me for help covering something. "Your mom's prescriptions this month are rough." Or, "The electric bill came in higher than expected." The requests were always small enough to sound reasonable. 300 here. 500 there. I said yes every time. Because that's what foundations do. They absorb the load without asking who put the weight there. Meanwhile, Ryan lived the life my father thought success looked like. New trucks every couple of years. Weekend trips with friends. Expensive dinners he'd post online with captions about working hard and enjoying life. And every Thanksgiving. Every birthday. Every gathering where the family sat around the same table. The hierarchy remained exactly the same. Ryan was the story. I was the support system. I didn't complain. Not once. Partly because I didn't want the conflict. But mostly because I believed something simple. If you keep showing up, people eventually notice. If you keep holding things together long enough, someone will acknowledge the work. For 4 years I maintained that house. 4 years of payments. 4 years of repairs. 4 years of quietly supporting the structure of a family that didn't seem to realize who was carrying the load. And then one Friday evening, Ryan called me with news that shifted the entire weight of that structure. "Nate," he said. His voice bright in that way it always was when he wanted something. "I'm coming home." He paused. "And this time I'm not coming alone." Before I tell you what happened when Ryan came back to the house, you need to understand something about numbers. Numbers don't argue. They don't exaggerate. They don't care about family narratives or emotional excuses. Numbers only record what actually happened. And the numbers attached to that house tell a very clear story. Over 4 years, I made 48 mortgage payments. Each one was $2,510. That comes out to $120,480 paid directly toward the loan principal and interest alone. But that number only covers the mortgage. Running a house costs more than signing one check a month. Electricity averaged about $360 during Colorado winters when the heating system ran almost constantly. Water and sewer combined were around $95. Internet and cable came to another $180 because my father insisted he needed every sports channel available. Groceries were technically supposed to be shared. But somehow the refrigerator was always full, even when I hadn't gone shopping. On average, I added about $150 a month just to keep things balanced. When you add the utilities and household expenses together, the total climbs fast. Conservatively speaking, over 4 years, I put more than $150,000 of my income into keeping that house operating. And that's before repairs. Houses age the same way people do. Small problems appear first. If you ignore them, they become expensive ones. The first repair came during the second winter. Ice built up along the edge of the roof over the back porch. And a slow leak started dripping through the ceiling drywall. I climbed a ladder on a freezing Saturday morning and patched it temporarily. But eventually the damaged section had to be replaced. The materials and labor cost me $4,800 out of pocket. The following summer, the old water heater in the basement failed. Replacement and installation ran another $2,900. A year later my father began complaining that the basement felt too cold during the winter months, since he occasionally used the space for storage. I installed a secondary heating unit to stabilize the temperature. That project cost $3. Senbai. None of those repairs were requested formally. They were simply problems that needed to be solved. So I solved them. Most weekends you could find me somewhere around the property with a tool in my hand. Power washer, paint roller, snow shovel. Colorado winters can bury a driveway overnight. More than once I was outside before sunrise clearing snow, so my parents wouldn't have to step through drifts when they left the house. My neighbor across the street noticed. Her name was Margaret Holloway. 70 years old. Retired school librarian. And the kind of neighbor who observes everything while pretending not to. One Saturday morning she leaned over her fence while I was repainting the back porch railing. "Nathan," she said. "Where's the rest of your family while you're doing all this work?" I glanced toward the house. The curtains in the living room were closed. "They're inside," I said. Margaret watched me for a moment longer than necessary. "You're a good son," she said quietly. At the time I took that as a compliment. Now I realize it was something closer to sympathy. Because the truth was simple. Every improvement, every repair, every dollar spent on that house came from one person. For 4 years I kept that place running like a system under constant maintenance. And I never once asked my parents for reimbursement. I never complained. I never kept score. Because in my mind the house wasn't just a financial investment. It was proof. Proof that I could build something stable. Proof that I could take care of my family. Proof that if I kept doing the right thing long enough, eventually the people around me would recognize the effort. But structures built on uneven foundations don't fail all at once. They shift gradually. Pressure builds in places you don't expect. Hairline cracks appear where everything once looked solid. And sometimes the moment a structure finally gives way begins with something as ordinary as a phone call on a Friday evening. That was the call Ryan made. "Nate," he said. Voice bright with that familiar energy. "I'm coming back to town." I leaned back in my chair. He waited a second. "And this time," he added, "I'm bringing Amanda with me." Amanda was his wife. They'd been married 8 months. And she was 7 months pregnant. 3 days later they pulled into the driveway of the house I had spent 4 years paying for. 2 suitcases. 3 boxes of baby supplies. And a plan I hadn't been told about. Ryan and Amanda arrived on a Friday evening just before sunset. His pickup rolled into the driveway like it had always belonged there. 2 large suitcases sat in the truck bed beside 3 taped boxes, labeled baby clothes, and nursery in black marker. Amanda stepped out first. She was 30. Small-framed. One hand resting automatically on her stomach the way pregnant women often do when they've learned to balance their weight differently. She stood for a moment in the driveway, studying the house with the kind of expression people use when evaluating a property they might buy. Ryan came around the truck and stretched like he had just returned from a long vacation. "Good to be home," he said. That word landed differently than it used to. "Inside." My father greeted them like they had been expected all along. Within 30 seconds I realized something that hadn't been mentioned during Ryan's phone call. The living room furniture had been rearranged. The recliner my father always kept by the window had been moved against the opposite wall. A corner of the room had been cleared entirely, leaving an open space that looked suspiciously like preparation for something. Victor had known they were coming. He just hadn't told me. Amanda walked through the living room slowly, glancing at the couch, the coffee table, the cleared corner. She shook her head. "This won't work," she said. Ryan frowned. "What won't?" "We can't put a baby in the living room." She said it calmly, the way someone might comment on the weather. My father turned toward me. "Not a question. A decision already made." "Nathan," he said. You'll need to vacate the bedroom. For a moment I thought I had misheard him. That's my room, I said evenly. I've been in that room for 4 years. Ryan shrugged. Well, things change. Amanda stepped forward slightly. It would probably be easier if you just moved out altogether, she added. Almost politely. My father nodded once. My mother stood in the hallway holding 3 flattened cardboard boxes. The exact same kind I had used when I moved into the house 4 years earlier. She must have kept them in the garage the entire time. As if she had always expected this moment to come. Victor crossed his arms. It's temporary, he said. Ryan has a family now. They need the space. I'm family too, I said. You know what I mean. That sentence ended the conversation. The next hour passed quietly. I packed my clothes. My laptop. A toolbox that had fixed more things in that house than anyone else ever had. 3 cardboard boxes. No one argued. No one apologized. Ryan carried a crib frame up the stairs while I carried my life down them. The basement still smelled like damp concrete and insulation. The heating unit I had installed a year earlier hummed quietly in the corner. Doing its job. I dragged an old mattress down from the guest closet and set it directly on the floor. Bare concrete walls. 1 overhead light. No bed frame. Upstairs I could hear Amanda moving furniture around in my old bedroom. The next afternoon she posted a picture on Instagram. A nursery. Soft pink decorations. A crib by the window I had installed. The caption read, "Family always makes room for the next generation." 200 likes. No one asked whose room it had been the day before. I slept in that basement for 3 nights. On the 3rd night, a pipe joint began leaking slowly above the corner of the room. Not a burst. Just a steady drip. Around 3 in the morning I woke up with the mattress damp beneath my back. Water spreading slowly through the fabric. I lay there in the dark staring at the ceiling above me. Their floor. And one thought ran through my head with the clarity of a calculation. I was paying $2.510 a month to sleep in a puddle beneath my own house. The next morning something else happened. Something that changed everything. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my truck in the parking lot outside my office. Finishing a protein bar before heading inside. My phone buzzed with a notification from the credit monitoring service I'd subscribed to years earlier. Engineers track things by instinct stress loads. Measurements. Numbers so monitoring my credit always felt like another system worth keeping an eye on. The alert was short. New lien detected on property. 214 Maple Ridge Drive. Fort Collins. CO. I read it once. Then again. Then a 3rd time. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of clerical error. Maybe the bank had misreported something related to the original mortgage. But when I opened the detailed report, the numbers told a very different story. A $102,000 mortgage lien had been filed against my house through Mountain Ridge Credit Union. A small community bank about 15 minutes from where my parents used to do their banking. The borrower listed on the deed of trust addendum was me, Nathan A. Except I had never signed anything. I had never visited Mountain Ridge Credit Union. And I had never authorized a second loan on my house. My stomach tightened as I opened the PDF containing the document image. There it was. My name. My signature. Or at least something that looked close enough to fool someone who didn't know what they were looking for. But I knew my own handwriting. Engineers spend years drafting lines precise enough to measure by the millimeter. You develop a strange familiarity with your own pen movements. The capital C in Cole was wrong. I always start the curve tight at the top. This one loop too wide. And the middle initial A for Andrew was printed. I never print it. I always write it in cursive. Someone had copied my signature from another document. Probably the truck lease I'd signed 2 years earlier. The one my father had insisted on photocopying for the family records. I called Mountain Ridge Credit Union immediately. After 10 minutes on hold. A branch manager confirmed that the loan had been processed 3 months earlier. The application, he said carefully, had been submitted by a family member acting on behalf of the property owner. There was also a witness signature on the paperwork. Linda Cole. My mother. For a few seconds I couldn't speak. The number echoed in my head. $102,000. Attached to my house. My credit. My financial identity. Without my permission. When I finally managed to ask where the funds had gone. The manager hesitated before answering. Those details would require a formal request, he said. But I already knew what I needed to know. Someone in my family had forged my signature. I sat there in the truck, with both hands gripping the steering wheel. Not out of fear. Out of anger. Because if that lien reached my credit report officially. My score 758. Built over nearly a decade of disciplined payments would collapse. Refinancing. Future loans. Everything tied to my financial record would be damaged. And the people responsible were sleeping comfortably in my house while I lay on a wet mattress in the basement. That night I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to a 24-hour diner near the interstate and sat in a booth with a black coffee and a napkin spread flat on the table. I drew a line down the middle. Left side. What I lose if I fight this. Right side. What I lose if I don't. The left column filled slowly. My relationship with my parents. Whatever remained of trust with my brother. The inevitable accusations from extended family about turning against them. Amanda's pregnancy. Every decision I made could be framed as attacking a pregnant woman. My father would make sure of that. The right column filled much faster. Ibailing Armayan. 0 inches fraudulent debt. A destroyed credit score. The certainty that if I allowed this once, they would eventually do it again. People who steal from you without consequences rarely stop. They simply get better at it. I stared at both columns for a long time. Then I crumpled the napkin and threw it away. Because the truth was simple. The decision had already been made the moment I saw the forged signature. The next morning I called a real estate attorney. Her name was Claire Donovan. And hiring her was the first step in taking my house and my life back. I called Claire Donovan at 9:12 the next morning. Her office sat in a renovated brick building near the courthouse downtown. She had practiced real estate law in Fort Collins for almost 2 decades, specializing in property disputes and fraud cases. A colleague from my engineering firm had recommended her months earlier when we were discussing landlord issues on a project. At the time, I never imagined I would need her. By noon I was sitting across from her desk with a folder of printed documents. Claire listened without interrupting while I explained everything from buying the house to sleeping in the basement to the credit alert I'd received the night before. 6 minutes passed while she read the loan documents on her monitor. When she finally leaned back in her chair, she removed her glasses and said something very calmly. Nathan, what your father did is forgery. She tapped the witness line on the screen. What your mother did by signing here is aiding it. Then she pointed to the transfer summary attached to the loan file. And depending on where the money went, your brother may be involved in fraud. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because I doubted them. Because hearing someone say them out loud made the situation real, in a way numbers alone couldn't. Claire slid a yellow legal pad toward me. From this moment forward, she said, you do not mention this to anyone in your family. Not your parents. Not your brother. No arguments. No confrontations. We document everything first. For the first time in 4 years. The money I was about to spend wasn't going toward the house. It was going toward protecting myself. Claire moved quickly. Within 48 hours she had submitted a formal request to Mountain Ridge Credit Union demanding every document connected to the loan. As the property owner, I had the legal right to obtain those records. The bank responded reluctantly. But they responded. 3 days later a thick packet arrived at Claire's office. We spread the pages across her conference table like evidence in a criminal investigation. Because that's exactly what it was. The forged deed of trust addendum sat on top of the stack. My name written in handwriting that was almost convincing. Almost. On the next page was the witness signature. Linda Cole. My mother's handwriting was unmistakable. She had always written grocery lists in the same neat, slightly slanted print. Claire flipped to the financial transfers and highlighted the numbers with a yellow marker. Here's where the money went, she said. The first transfer, $41,000 wired directly to a credit card account under Ryan Cole's name. His entire outstanding balance. Gone in a single payment. The second, $24,000 sent to Front Range Motors, the dealership where Ryan worked. Down payment on a new truck. The third, $17,000 withdrawn in cash across 3 separate transactions. Each withdrawal authorized by my mother. The final $20,000 sat untouched in a personal savings account belonging to my father. Claire leaned back in her chair. They divided the money like it was a family bonus. She said quietly. All I could picture was the basement. The damp mattress. The slow drip from the pipe above my head. While $102,000 borrowed in my name had been distributed like Christmas gifts upstairs. Claire then pointed to another page in the packet. This is interesting, she said. The loan officer who had processed the application was a man named Kevin Walters. According to the bank records, the normal identity verification procedures had been bypassed. No in-person meeting with the property owner. No video verification. Just paperwork submitted by my father and accepted without proper confirmation. Claire smiled slightly. They thought they were clever, she said. But clever people don't commit document fraud through a bank that keeps digital records of every transaction. She tapped the stack of papers. We have everything we need. I folded my hands together. So what happens next? Claire looked at the calendar on her desk. There are 2 paths, she said. The legal one. And the strategic one. She paused. And if you want this to end in a way your family can't twist or hide, we're going to use both. 17 days after I first discovered the forged loan, My father hosted a gathering in the backyard of the house. Officially, it was a baby celebration for Ryan and Amanda, the first grandchild in the Cole family. My father had texted relatives and neighbors all week, telling them it would be a small open house. By the time Sunday afternoon arrived, it wasn't small. 45 people filled the yard. Folding chairs were arranged in rows beneath the cottonwood tree. A long table held trays of catered food from a deli down the street. Pink and white balloons were tied to the mailbox, drifting lazily in the late autumn wind. Ryan stood beside Amanda near the porch steps, one arm around her shoulders. She wore a lavender maternity dress and smiled for every photo someone took. My mother arranged paper plates beside a lemon cake she had baked that morning. And my father stood in the center of it all, like a man hosting a victory party. From the curb 2 houses away, I watched the scene from my car. The manila folder sat on the passenger seat beside me. Inside it were copies of everything Claire had collected. The deed to the house, the forged signature comparison, the bank's letter suspending the fraudulent loan, and the transaction summary showing where every dollar of the $102 Noel had gone. Claire had organized the documents carefully, tabbed and labeled. Evidence. I checked the time. The party had already been going for over an hour. Perfect. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the house. The same walkway I had shoveled snow from every winter. The same porch steps I had repaired 2 summers earlier. My father saw me first. He was mid-conversation with one of my cousins when his expression changed. Surprise. Then, irritation. Then something closer to worry. He walked toward me quickly. "What are you doing here?" he asked under his breath. "I'm at my house," I replied calmly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Don't make a scene. I'm not the one who forged someone's name on a mortgage application." That sentence carried farther than I expected. A few nearby conversations stopped. Heads turned. My father grabbed my arm just above the elbow, trying to guide me away from the yard. "Lower your voice," he said through clenched teeth. A clear voice came from behind us. "Victor, take your hand off him." Margaret Holloway stood near the fence with a glass of lemonade in her hand, watching the entire exchange. My father released my arm. Now almost everyone in the yard was looking at us. Ryan appeared on the porch beside Amanda. "What's going on?" he asked. I stepped onto the porch, 3 steps higher than the yard, high enough that everyone could see me clearly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Silence carries further than shouting when people are already listening. "Most of you were told I moved out because I wanted independence," I said. "That's not what happened." I opened the folder and removed the first document. "This house is legally mine," I continued. "I purchased it 4 years ago. My name is the only name on the deed." I held up the document. "I've made every mortgage payment since then." My father stepped forward. "Nathan, stop this." 3 weeks ago, I continued. Ignoring him, I discovered that my father forged my signature on a $102,000 loan against this property. The yard went silent. Not polite silence. The heavy silence that falls when people realize they're witnessing something real. I held up the signature comparison. "This is my real signature," I said, pointing to the left column. "And this is the one used to secure the loan." I turned the page. The bank confirmed the signatures do not match. Next came the transaction sheet. $41,000 went to Ryan's credit card debt. Ryan's face drained of color. $24,000 paid the down payment on his new truck. I flipped the page. $17,000 was withdrawn in cash by my mother. And $20,000 is currently sitting in my father's personal savings account. I lowered the papers. My parents stole $102,000 from me by forging my name. No one moved. Amanda stared at Ryan. Her hands tightened around the fabric of her dress. "Ryan," she said quietly, "tell me that's not true." Ryan looked down at the grass. "Amanda, tell me it's not true." Her voice rose. "Tell me you didn't use stolen money to pay off your debt." Ryan swallowed. "It's complicated." Amanda took a step back like someone had just pushed her. Across the yard, my grandmother slowly stood up from her chair. Her voice was thin with age but steady. "Victor," she said, looking directly at my father, "I didn't raise you to steal from your own son." My father opened his mouth. No words came out. Guests began collecting their belongings quietly. Paper plates were set down unfinished. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Within minutes, people were walking toward their cars. The celebration had collapsed. Ryan stood frozen in the yard. Amanda walked into the house without another word. The screen door slammed behind her. My father sat down heavily in one of the folding chairs. For the first time in my life, he looked like a man who had run out of explanations. I closed the folder. "I'm not here for revenge," I said quietly. "I'm here so everyone knows the truth." Then I stepped off the porch and walked back toward my car. Behind me, the party ended in silence. An hour after the guests left. The yard looked like a party that had been abandoned mid-sentence. Folding chairs were still scattered across the grass. Paper plates sat untouched on the catering table. The pink balloons tied to the mailbox drifted slowly in the afternoon wind, celebrating something that no longer existed. From the curb I watched through the front window. My father sat in the living room recliner without moving. Just sitting there. My mother moved around the kitchen, wiping the same section of countertop over and over again like she was trying to erase the afternoon. Upstairs. Amanda had locked herself in the nursery that used to be my bedroom. Ryan stood outside the door knocking. Her voice carried through the house even from the street. "You told me you got a bonus," she said. "You told me that money was yours." Ryan tried to explain. "I was going to tell you eventually. After the baby was born," she shot back. "After we moved into a house that isn't even yours." That night Amanda called me. Her voice wasn't angry. It was flat. "I need the truth," she said. "All of it." So I sent her the transaction records Claire had given me. Every transfer. Every withdrawal. 15 minutes later she called again. "He told me the truck was a dealership discount," she said quietly. "I didn't know." "I believe you," I said. A long pause. "I'm sorry," she added. "I told you to leave your own house." 2 days later she packed her things and moved to her mother's place in Boulder. Ryan called her 14 times that week. She answered none of them. Without Amanda and the baby to defend him, Ryan lost his shield. My father turned on him almost immediately. "If you hadn't been drowning in debt," Victor snapped during one argument I overheard later, "none of this would have happened." The golden child had suddenly become the liability. My father's reputation began collapsing in slower ways. The weekly poker game he hosted every Friday quietly stopped. 2 of the men who attended had been at the baby celebration. They had seen everything. Phone calls from relatives stopped. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Even my grandmother refused to answer his calls for several days. Inside the house, the structure that had held my family together for decades was finally giving way. And once a load-bearing wall collapses, the rest of the building rarely stands for long. The legal side of the situation moved slower than the emotional collapse. But it ended with far more certainty. 6 weeks after the day of the baby celebration, Mountain Ridge Credit Union completed its internal investigation. The results were exactly what Claire had predicted. The $102,000 loan was voided in its entirety, because the signature on the deed of trust did not match the verified signature on file for the property owner. The bank classified the transaction as fraudulent and unauthorized. The lien placed against my house was removed from the county property records. Every credit bureau, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax deleted the fraudulent entry from my file. My credit score, which had never actually dropped thanks to Claire's early dispute filings, rose from 758 to 772. Once the removal was finalized, the loan officer who had approved the application, Kevin Walters, was terminated. In a formal letter, the bank admitted that identity verification procedures had been ignored and offered a $5,000 compensation payment as a goodwill settlement. I declined the money. Instead, Claire negotiated something else: a written policy change. From that point forward, the bank would require in-person identity verification for every mortgage or lien application tied to residential property. They notarized the commitment. The final question Claire asked me was about criminal charges. Legally, I had every right to file them. Forgery, financial fraud, identity theft. It could have meant years of court hearings and possible prison sentences. I thought about it for a long time. Then I said no. Not because they didn't deserve it. Because I had already taken back everything they tried to steal. My house, my credit, my name. And sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's simply about reclaiming what was always yours. 6 months after everything happened, I moved back into the house on Maple Ridge Drive. My house. My name on the deed. My key in the lock. The first thing I did was repaint. Not because I was trying to erase what happened, but because I wanted every room to reflect a choice I made for myself. The bedroom walls became a calm slate gray. The kitchen got a clean white coat that made the morning sunlight bounce off the cabinets. And the basement, the place where I had slept on a wet mattress beneath my own house, was finished properly. New flooring. Vapor barrière. Recessed lighting. No bare concrete. No dripping pipes. Just a quiet, solid room. Margaret Holloway walked over the afternoon I moved back in carrying a small lavender plant in a clay pot. She placed it on the porch railing and squeezed my shoulder. "Welcome home," she said. "For real this time." Work changed too. 3 months after the situation with the house ended, my firm promoted me to senior structural engineer. My salary increased to $108,000 a year. And for the first time in a long while I felt like the future I had worked for was finally moving forward again. But something else happened during those months. I started writing. At first it was just notes, reflections about family systems. Responsibility. And what happens when the reliable person in a household finally stops carrying the entire structure alone? One of those essays turned into a blog post. I called it The Basement Test. It was shared thousands of times within a few weeks. Then a small publisher in Denver reached out. They wanted a book. Sometimes the moment you stop holding up a collapsing structure is the exact moment you finally start building something stronger. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that loyalty without boundaries isn't love. For years I believed that working harder, paying more, fixing everything, and staying quiet would eventually earn respect. What it actually did was make people comfortable relying on me without ever acknowledging the cost. Some families confuse support with obligation. They mistake the person holding everything together for a resource instead of a human being. The moment you stop funding that illusion, everything changes. Not because you became selfish, but because you finally stopped pretending exploitation was the same thing as love. If this story connected with you, consider liking the video, subscribing to the and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it tonight. Disclaimer: this story is inspired by real-life situations, but has been adapted for storytelling purposes. Names, details, and circumstances may be modified to protect privacy and enhance narrative clarity.